Welcome to the third episode of Beacon Podcast. Here I'll discuss about two important social issues. First is Uniform Civil Code. It's been news recently. You've been reading it all across social media, newspapers everywhere. Second is domestic violence law in India. So let me start with UCC. Now when we go into criminal laws, we see rape, murder, abduction, kidnapping, culpable homicide. There is one punishment irrespective of the religion or race or creed or region of that person. All right? That's not the case in the case of civil laws. We have CPC, but along with that we have the personal laws of Hindus, of Muslims, the personal practices of different tribes, so on and so forth, in terms of alimony, marriage, divorce, property, inheritance. So there's hue and cry for one law for the entire country. And let's trace back the history, by the way. A lot of social reforms was being done by the Britishers in the first half of the 19th century. The sati abolition by Regulation 17 in 1829, 1856, the Widow Remarriage Act. Of course, I'm not discounting the untiring efforts of stalwarts like Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and Rajaram Mohan Roy. But then these were the legislations which were passed by the Britishers. What happened after that? 1857, we had the First War of Independence, and after that, the British became cautious not to interfere in the internal affairs of Indians, of their religions, even of the princely states, so long as their colonial interests were intact. So, for one century off. Then come close to the independence of India, the Constituent Assembly debated about UCC whether to put it in Part 3 or Part 4 of the Constitution, ultimately voted it to put in the Part 4 of the Constitution. Alright, that is DPSPs. And directive principles are not directly enforceable by the court of law, but then it is fundamental in the governance of the country and shall be the duty of the state to keep them in mind while implementing laws, while making laws actually. Alright, in 1950s, then what happened? The Hindu Code Bills were passed, in which some progressive Hindu laws, Hindu Marriage Act, Hindu Succession Act were passed. Not for other communities, but for Hindus. In 1985, Shah Bano case happened. In 1995, Sarla Mudgal case happened. In both of them, the Supreme Court told the central government to implement UCC. It wasn't implemented. In 2005, the Hindu Succession Act was amended to make females at par with their male co-partners in terms of inheritance. The same thing was not implemented in other communities. So what happened is that there was wide disparity in the personal laws of different tribes, religions. It became a hodgepodge. Come to 2023, we have this debate. So what will be the benefits if we have UCC implemented? See, first of all, gender equality. We remember the Triple Talaq Act of 2019, in which Triple Talaq was made null and void, and that empowered the Muslim women. And something similar can happen if UCC is implemented, in which women and maybe other vulnerable groups are discriminated against in terms of inheritance, marriage, etc. And why do we need to make a law for talaq or for law for inheritance or property all separately? Why not just one law? So if UCC one law is made, codification will happen, just like we had labor laws codified into labor codes. A codification will happen, single law, it will be legal simplification. Things will become simple. Then it will promote secularism, a religion neutral policy. All right. It will also promote Article 14, that everyone is equal before law. But what are the challenges? You see, India is a very pluralistic country. Lots of diverse creeds, races, languages, cultures. It's a melting pot. So, will it be wise to flood majoritarianism upon the individual practices? Well, that is a challenge, definitely. Because, say for example, in Meghalaya, there are certain tribes which practice the matrilineal system of inheritance, in which the daughter gets the family inheritance. So that makes their women more empowered than probably the rest of India. So would you water down those by making a uniform civil code? Well, we have to make compromises, I believe. What about Article 25? What about Article 25, which says that there is freedom of practicing one's religion? That is also a fundamental right, just like Article 14. So the way forward is to make compromises. We have to invite the representatives of the different religions, of different regions, of tribes, and make them sit. Public discussion should openly happen, and maybe some progressive practices should be accepted. And with that compromise, 100% UCC might not happen, but in some shape or form, it should be rolled out so that we move into the next level of political discourse. And then right balance should be struck between Article 14 and 25. That is an art of policymakers. And yeah, unity in diversity. So let's move on to domestic violence laws in India. So domestic violence is any abuse, all right, whether physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, or even economic that a woman faces from a person with whom she is in domestic relationship, living in the same domestic household. Now, what is domestic relationship? Not just husband, but even in-laws. Not just in-laws, but even any member in the joint family, or even live in relationships without marriage. And what is the same domestic household? Well, when the husband and wife are permanently staying together, not separate. And if they have the same kitchen, that is a good proof of the fact that they are staying together. So, this is as per the Indian law. The Indian law is the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005. Some people just call it the Domestic Violence or DV Act, but protection of women, it doesn't protect the husbands, it doesn't even protect the child directly, but through the mother. So, protection of women. And it's a big evil. About 30% of Indian women are reported to have suffered domestic violence at least once in their lifetime. And as per studies, this is the biggest form of violence, more than molestation and rape. More than 30% of the violence cases against women are domestic violence cases. So it's a big social evil, not just in India, but in many other countries. In fact, in 1979, an American author wrote the book The Battered Woman, and it has been issue in many countries because it is caused by alcoholism and drug abuse, and the husbands put the frustration on the wives, unemployment not just of the husband who put the frustration on the wife, but even unemployment of the women who are bound in their homes, confined in their homes. And then the patriarchal society is such that a lot of times domestic violence has happened even during the COVID time, when the UN Women called domestic violence as the shadow pandemic. That was the scary picture at that point of time. So it really becomes important for us to fight this virus at different fronts: social, political, legal. So from the legal front, we have the DV Act. I've talked about the definition of domestic violence. Now, what are the remedies? When the aggrieved woman goes to a magistrate's court, at the very first hearing, she can ask for an immediate relief order in terms of protection order or residence order or custody order or compensation order. She can seek monetary compensation. If she is not being allowed to live in the house of husband, residence order can be sought, so on and so forth. So this is a provision, plus protection officers per district are made available through the Act, and shelter homes are also mentioned in the Act, and to some extent free legal aid, etc., etc. So these are the broad provisions of the Act. What is the main objective of the Act, by the way? Main objective of the Act is protection, prevention, not cure. It is a civil act, it's not a criminal act. So when I told about all of these orders, they are preventive orders, all right? They are civil injunctions. So it aims to suppress domestic violence by utilizing the inherent deterrence that these civil injunctions carry with them. So what are the challenges? Challenges, first of all, social stigma associated with domestic violence, because domestic violence, nobody wants to talk about it, even not the victims, not their family. And even if they talk about it, the police officers, the civil society organizations, lawyers, they are not very well aware of it. They are not trained enough. So we need training, we need awareness, we need sensitization campaigns. How many people know that live-in relationships are also included within the definition of domestic relationships? So we need awareness campaigns in that regard. Apart from that, a lot of infrastructural gap is there in the quantity and quality of shelter homes. So more budgetary allocation is required. And one protection officer per district, but more than 500 to 600 cases per district. Is it enough? Certainly not. And nearly 5 lakh cases of DV Act are pending in India. So the legal system is not enough to handle it and successfully dispose it of. So we do require special fast-track courts. What are some of the reforms, by the way? Well, in terms of reforms, I would say that the scope of DV Act can be expanded to include marital rape. More awareness campaigns can be explicitly mentioned within the Act, and free legal aid can be explicitly mentioned within the Act, and measures can be taken to remove social stigma. And domestic violence is still a civil offense. It should be made criminalized. This is not my opinion, but the opinion of lots of experts who have written about the subject. So this is the way forward, and hopefully it's a powerful tool. If used properly, it can definitely help in reducing the social evil called domestic violence. So I've discussed about UCC, I've discussed about social evil called domestic violence and its law in India, and there are tons and tons of other topics that I shall be discussing from a wide variety of subjects. in the upcoming podcast. So stay tuned. Do subscribe to Beacon.